The important role of medical nutrition to optimize BH4 therapy for patients with PKU. Professor Anita McDonald, metabolic dietitian at Birmingham Children's Hospital in the UK, explains what phenylketonuria or PKU is.
Deficiency of the enzyme phenylalanine hydroxylase leads to inability to metabolize the amino acid phenylalanine, causing elevated phenylalanine concentrations in the blood and the brain. Untreated PKU causes global intellectual disability, significant delays in achieving developmental milestones, hyperactive behaviour with autistic features and seizures. If treatment is started within the first 3 weeks of life, a reversible intellectual disability is prevented.
Professor Rani Singh, metabolic dietitian and professor at the Department of Human Genetics at Emory University in Atlanta, USA, elaborates on what can happen if patients with PKU are not treated properly.
We also know if they are treated and not treated appropriately, in other words, if their levels continue to be high in the blood, or they have low tyrosine levels, that can also have detrimental effects. These chronic fluctuations of phenylalanine can result in musty smell, hair color can turn lighter, some detrimental effects on the brain development and function, like slow reaction time, problems thinking clearly, emotional problems, depression, anxiety, fear of leaving home. Some patients also report some sleep problems.
A strict, lifelong, low phenylalanine diet is the principal treatment of PKU.
We know while many therapies are emerging, diet is still the primary treatment, and this includes enough intact protein or natural protein from food sources needed for growth, but not high enough to accumulate, plus protein substitute, or we in US refer to as medical foods, and low protein modified foods to provide enough energy and satiety for proper growth and quality of life. So briefly, controlling the intact protein through diet restriction and providing enough nutrition through protein substitutes and energy through low protein modified foods.
Most patients with PKU tolerate less than 10 grams of protein daily. Foods such as meat, fish, eggs, cheese, bread, flour and pasta should be avoided. The diet must be supplemented with a low phenylalanine protein substitute.
Protein substitutes for PKUs are a very important source of fee-free protein and other nutrients, and are needed as high as in about 80% in classical PKU cases, and to a lesser amount in mild forms of PKU. We recommend that they are consumed 3 times per day along with intact protein to maximize protein synthesis for growth and development. Medical foods or protein substitutes enhance anabolism and help shift the blood Phe toward the therapeutic range which results in improved neurocognition and psychological outcomes, which is the ultimate goal of PKU management.
This is particularly important during illness and trauma, where protein substitutes have a protective role by counteracting protein catabolism.
For 20 to 50% of patients with PKU, mainly those with mild PKU, drug treatment with tetrahydrobiopterin, or BH4, is able to lower blood Phe concentrations substantially. This enables responders to relax their Phe-restricted diet and eat more natural protein, whilst decreasing or even stopping protein substitutes. However, researchers have reported some concerns about the nutritional status of patients on BH4 therapy. Let's hear from Dr. Carmen Roeder, metabolic dietitian at the Hospital for Children and Adolescents of the University of Leipzig in Germany.
I really have concerns because this is even more complicated than treating a patient on classical PKU, because patients are so unique and different. So some patients, the Phe tolerance might change because of BH4. This is what we want, this is what we wish. And if there are patients that can stop the diet because of BH4, this is just wonderful, and we rejoice with the patients. Yes, now you can eat what everybody else is eating, but these patients, their taste is so different, because when they were little children and infants, their taste preferences were formed, and now it is very different from healthy subjects. And they might do food choices that are not meeting all the nutritional requirements. So we have to have a very, very close look to the patients who can eat like healthy subjects. And we don't think about this because we think, oh, they are healthy now, they can eat what they want. But we have to have a look at them because they eat different than other people do. And then another problem we have with patients whose feed tolerance is loosened. They can eat more of regular food. This is just wonderful, but we have to look. Do they still need a protein substitute?
We actually addressed this in a couple of publications, asking the question, what happens to the nutritional status when the diet is liberalized in protein and decreased or discontinued in the medical food? We found that at the end of 1 year, some of the key micronutrient and dietary intake decreases, and this is reflected by the shift in blood biomarkers to lower normal range. This, to me, emphasizes the need for closer monitoring and supplementation of nutrients.
Some nutrients are particularly at risk, such as iron, calcium, zinc, and vitamin B12.
If patients on a liberalized diet continue to self-restrict high-protein foods from animal sources, protein substitutes can further ensure that patients meet their needs for all essential amino acids other than Phe.
We had 2 patients that could loosen their diet completely. They could eat freely, and one of the patients, she said, well, now I'm on this diet for such a long time, now I try meat and processed meat, but I just don't like it. And I try to eat it and I don't get it down, and there are so many products I were not allowed to eat before, but I don't like them anymore. And we had to bring her back on a protein substitute because all her micronutrients and the protein requirements were not met. Even she could have the choice to take it. And then we had another boy, and now he was allowed to eat, and he liked the food so much that he got obese because he was eating so much. And so there are 2 very extremes of these patients that we had to look at. And then there was, I remember, another girl. She could loosen her diet because of BH4 so that she wouldn't need any protein substitute regarding the protein. But when we looked at all the micronutrients couldn't be met. So she had to go back on the protein substitute, not because of the protein, but because of the micronutrients.
There is no consensus on the long-term protein substitute requirements of patients on BH4. Therefore, all the available evidence was recently systematically reviewed. Meta-analysis of data from over 300 patients on long-term BH4 therapy showed that almost half of them still required some amount of protein substitute. For these patients, although BH4 allowed some diet liberalization, protein substitute was still necessary to meet protein and/or micronutrient requirements.
What we found in the review was exactly what we have observed in our own center. That is about half of the responders that can skip the diet completely or still need a partial diet, and they still need a protein substitute.
In my experience, the use of these therapies did liberalize diet only in about half the patients and perceived improved quality of life. Many patients have been able to discontinue low protein modified foods and decrease the amount of protein substitute required. But this also means that it requires monitoring not only for diet adherence, but also the drug adherence to achieve optimal outcomes. In addition, dietitians have to become more creative with prescribing and teaching strategies for diet liberalization, how it is different for each responder, and it is necessary to personalize for each patient with PKU. So the time has come where the personalization of diet for PKU has become even more important in our field. Based on my experience, the protein substitute was still required by many. And the 3 main categories that come to my mind are the degree of response by the PKU patients, or if they have already, they're adults, or they have to still enter their growth phase, and the females who want to get pregnant and are still in a reproductive age. So from our observations, the response rate is very similar to what we saw in the meta-analysis. The patients with PKU had a spectrum of response, meeting the minimum criteria of 30% response to 100%, probably dependent on the mutation and growth phase. So less the response, the more likely the need for protein substitute. In addition, from my trials, I very quickly realized that for pediatric patients, not to take them off protein substitute if they have not achieved intact protein tolerance, so that to meet their maximum intact protein needs during the growth phase. I think it's very important to remember they are going to need more protein during the growth phases. So I had to put some male patients back on protein substitute at age 12 when they entered rapid growth phase after taking them off, and that made it a challenge. And then finally, the women who are potentially going to get pregnant, we make sure that they continue on that to allow that option for them when they get pregnant, should they not want to continue with the drug.
Based on the review and author's clinical experience, clear recommendations were made to guide healthcare professionals when adjusting dietary prescriptions of patients on BH4.
Some of the recommendations for professionals I feel are in the systematic BHA4 trial with controlled diet, clear communication of expectations to the patients and family, like frequent monitoring of blood Phe concentration, diet analysis is very critical. Also, I think as dietitians, it is important to start looking at the genotype from PKU biodatabase as one of the factors to evaluate potential responsiveness. I think that can help us with our decision making with the medical team. And to continue nutrition assessments and need for protein substitutes and supplements during different phases of life, particularly during growth phase or during pregnancy. But I also feel that the close monitoring or the simultaneous monitoring of diet and drug is important. Keeping open communication with medical team related to drug dose change and being proactive with weight changes along with the diet changes in diet prescriptions is very critical.
If protein tolerance allows, introduce some dairy products such as cheese and yogurt to improve calcium intake. Still encourage a generous intake of fruit and vegetables. Maintain good routine with protein substitute. Remind people that continual adherence is still necessary. PKU has not gone away.
Dr. Roda further insists on one recommendation.
Monitoring, 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 and monitoring again. You have to monitor everything. Plasma Phe values, Phe intake, protein intake, micronutrient intake. You have to look at the plasma levels of the micronutrients. You have to watch growth and development. And so it is very, very important to monitor the patients and monitor them on all different levels regarding PKU and management of PKU, because it is more complicated and more difficult to treat those patients than the patients with classical PKU or non-responders.
Be wary about stopping protein substitute in young children. Patients should remain accustomed to the taste of protein substitute. It may be needed during illness, pregnancy, or if BH4 is stopped.
Professor Singh and Dr. Roda also share some practical tips and watch-outs.
Plans for diet changes if periods of drug are not accessible to the patient, because there have been situations where the drug was not available to our patients or can get disrupted due to insurance issues or pharmacy issues. And it's very important for patients to have a clear plan how to use protein substitutes to maintain the Phe levels during those disruptions.
When we ask patients, would you like to try BH4 for your, if that would work, if you are a responder, and most of the patients said yes, then we told them to do a Phe challenge, to eat more Phe than they on a regular basis would do to get the Phe levels high. And so they were allowed to eat more foods of the regular foods that they would do before. And then we told them, sometimes we had to tell them, well, you have to go back now. It is too much and it's too high. And for our patient, it wasn't bad, but sometimes it could be very hard to go back on a more strict diet if you had the chance to do it a few days or few weeks for this feed challenge. Now there are feed tablets on the market, and now when we do it with older patients, not right after birth, when we do the food challenge, we give them the feed, they stay on the regular diet, and we give them the feed tablets that they do not have to change their diet. So they can keep on the diet. We do the food challenge with the tablets, and then we see how BH4 would work.
The authors also make a plea for more holistic assessments when studying new treatments for PKU.
It was very disappointing that we had to exclude a large number of articles from our systematic review because no information on change in dietary intakes and nutritional status was included in many papers.
It is important not to concentrate just on one outcome measure, such as blood phenylalanine levels, when assessing the effectiveness of any new therapy. At baseline, before drug management, it is important that we have a good understanding of dietary patterns, natural protein intake, protein substitute adherence, and nutritional status. Once the new drug therapy is commenced, we need to systematically collect dietary data to understand the impact of any management change.
The authors conclude on the future of medical nutrition in PKU management.
Well, it will play a role as long as patients are not completely off diet and have to change a diet. So if it's BH4 or PEG valiase, it doesn't matter. The nutritional principle will always be the same. We have to watch how much protein can they eat because of the medical treatment and how much is needed by the protein substitute, and we have to watch the micronutrients, and we have to watch growth and development. So this will be always a topic for the nutritionist to look at the patients, and we still have enough to do, and it's even getting more complicated than just treating a person or patient with classical PKU.
Patients with PKU are managed with a phenylalanine restricted diet from infancy. They become accustomed to eating a very limited range of foods. Some patients develop food neophobia and have disordered eating patterns. Drug management may relax the protein intake, but patients are unlikely to change their dietary habits overnight. This will take time, and patients will need good nutritional support as they adapt to their new foods that they can now eat.
I still feel that diet is central to the treatment of PKU patients because while the diet is liberalized, it is not unrestricted. The degree of liberalization varies based on many factors. Therefore, personalizing this lifelong diet with adjunct therapies to improve outcomes becomes even a bigger challenge for dietitians to keep up with nutritional strategies for their patients with PKU.
To find out more, please check out the full scientific publication, also available on Danon Nutricia campus.